for today's presentation, we're going to prove identities. Okay, so from our previous video or previous discussion, we have derived the 8 fundamental identities. But now, what we're going to do is to prove identities. So let us first define what identities are. We say that it is an identity if the left hand side and the right hand side of the equation are equal, or the left hand side is equal to the right hand side for whatever value is substituted to the variable. Okay, but since we are dealing with trigonometric functions here, then we're gonna be proving trigonometric identities. Okay, so when we say trigonometric identity, this is actually an equation that involves trigonometric functions, which is true for all the values of theta or for all the values of the angle for which the functions are defined. Okay, so there are a lot of identities that we may encounter in this lesson. Okay, so actually in proving identities, there are no such general rule in proving them. Okay, ito po ay walang definite na formula on how are we going to prove certain identities, but we are given the idea of the fundamental identity, and what we're going to do is to manipulate what we know and do some algebraic processes. Okay, so let's proceed with example number 1. What we're going to do is to prove that cosecant x is equal to 1 plus secant x over tan x plus sine x. Okay, it is somewhat very hard to, if we're going to take a look at this one. Okay, because we're dealing with fractions here. Okay, so first things first, if we're gonna be dealing with this one, what we're going to do is to at least find parts, either left hand or the right hand, or what we're going to do is to determine which part of the identity is more complicated. Is it the left hand side or the right hand side? Since the left hand side here, which is the cosecant x, is much simpler than that of the right side, what we're going to do is to manipulate the right hand side. Ito po yung gagalawin natin kasi ito yung mas mahirap, since yung nasa left ay mas madali or simpler. Okay, so ang gagawin natin is for us to manipulate this one. What we're going to do, since alam natin or given tayo ng idea ni ratio identity, pwede nating i-represent si secant bilang 1 over cos at si tangent bilang sine over cos. So yun yung gagawin natin, and we are to prove if it's equal to cosecant of x. Okay, so again, what we're going to do is to represent secant as, or using the ratio proportion or ratio identity, that is secant is equal to 1 over cosine of x. Okay, next is for us to represent tan as the ratio, or using the ratio, using the, what do you call that, using the reciprocal identity, using the reciprocal identity, it's tangent, using the ratio identity, we can represent tangent of x as the sine of x over the cosine of x. Okay, so again, ang una nating ginawa is we determine whether, or we determine what part of the identity is much simpler and which is more complicated, at yung mas komplikado, yun po yung gagalawin natin, and then we'll try to at least apply the fundamental identities that we did a while ago. Okay, and then since we are dealing with whole numbers here and then we have fraction, what we're going to do is just to combine this one. We use or we apply some algebraic processes. So for us to combine 1 plus 1 over cosine, what we're going to do is to multiply this part by cosine of x, making this equivalent to cosecant of x equals that's gonna be cosine of x times 1, that is cosine. Okay, again, what we're going to do with this one is for us to multiply this whole by the cosine of x para maging isang fraction lang yung nasa numerator. Okay, that's the cosine of x, and that will yields 2 cosine of x times 1, that is cosine of x. And then cosine of x divided by cosine of x times 1, that's gonna be 1. Alright, and then the denominator would be the cosine of x. Okay, same thing goes with the denominator. Okay, we multiply both sides by, or we multiply it with the cosine of x, which is the LCD. Okay, sorry. Alright, there you go. And then simplifying that one, that's gonna be cosine of x times sine of x, that is cosine of x sine of x, because we cannot even combine them. And then what we're going to do is cosine of x times the sine of x, that is another what? That is another cosine of x, or plus the cosine of x plus the cosine of x, or sorry. Okay, for us, since we already have this one, cosine of x divided by cosine of x, that is 1, multiplied by the sine of x, that is just sine of x, sorry, plus cosine of x times sine of x, that's gonna be cosine of x plus the sine of x, or sorry, cosine of x sine of x, because we multiply them, and then the denominator would become the cosine of x. Alright, and tulad ng sinabi ko kanina, in dealing with this one, we have to manipulate it algebraically. So for us to simplify this complex fraction, what we're going to do is to what? To just copy the numerator and then multiply it with the reciprocal of the denominator, making this, okay, let us just copy this one, making this cosine of x plus 1 over cosine of x plus, or over cosine of x, multiplied by the reciprocal of the denominator, which is the cosine of x over the sine of x plus the cosine of x sine x, or cosine of x sine of x. Okay? Alright. And then, pwede na po nating i-simplify. So, cosine of x divided by cosine of x is 1. That's why pwede natin siyang i-cancel. So, meaning to say, the cosecant of x would be equivalent to, or this part of the equation would be equivalent to the cosine of x plus 1, the cosine of x plus 1 over the sine of x plus the cosine of x sine x, or cosine of x sine of x. Okay, and then since kung mapapansin natin yung denominator, there is a common factor, which is sine x. We can actually extract it. Okay, making this equivalent to the cosine of x plus 1 over, extract natin yung common factor, that is the sine of x. And then, kapag tinanggal natin si sine of x dito, matitira would be 1, plus, kapag tinanggal naman natin yung factor na sine x dito sa expression na cosine x sine x, that's gonna be the cosine of x alone. Alright? So, finactor out lang po natin yung denominator. And, kung mapapansin natin, this is actually a common factor. So, pwede po natin siyang i-lowest term, and that would be equivalent to what? That would be equivalent to just, since makakancel na natin yung both cosine of x plus 1 at saka yung 1 plus cosine of x, that's gonna be 1 over sine x. And if we're going to simplify this expression, we all know that 1 over sine x, or 1 over sine of an angle, is actually what? Using the reciprocal identity, this is actually equivalent to cosecant of x. Okay? So, in this example, we have just proved that indeed cosecant of x is identical with 1 plus sine of 1 plus secant of x over tan x plus sine x. Okay? Again, there is no general formula. There is no general or there is no definite way on how are we going to prove identities. Okay? Magbibigay na lang po si sir ng suggestions or suggested tips on how are you going to prove identities na makikita nyo sa video description sa baba. Okay? So, we have just proved that this given is an identity. Okay? So, that's it. That's for example number 1. Let's proceed with example number 2. So, kung mapapansin ninyo, we have down here 1 or the cube of 1 minus the tangent of beta equals the cotangent of beta minus 1 over the cotangent of beta multiplied by the secant beta square minus 2 tan beta. This is somewhat very complicated kung titignan natin. Alright? Pero if we are given with the knowledge of the fundamental identities, then we can simply prove this one. All right? So piliin po natin anong side ba yung mas mahirap or mas complicated. Is it the left side or is it the right side? Okay? So kung mapapansin natin, medyo complicated talaga si left side or si right side, sorry. Si right side. So we're gonna start with the right side. So, ito po yung i-manipulate natin using our identities. Alright? So, tulad nito. Ayan, nire-write ko na siya. And what we are going to do is to manipulate this one. Okay, by what? Since we all know, using the reciprocal identity, cotangent of b or the cotangent of beta is actually can be written as 1 over tan. So, i-represent natin siya as 1 over tan. Okay? The 1 over tan of beta minus 1. Alright, minus 1. And so with this one. Sorry, nawala yung beta. Alright, the cotangent of beta. So, represent natin siya as 1 over the tangent of beta. 1 over the tangent of beta. Again, ginamit natin yung fundamental identity. Alright? Multiplied by. So, ano pa kaya yung pwede nating lagyan ng identity? Pwede kaya si tan or si secant squared beta. Alright? So, using the Pythagorean identity, sa Pythagorean identity, we secant squared beta can actually be represented as what? It can actually be represented as, alright, kung natatandaan, ano po kaya yon? That is actually 1 plus 1 plus tangent of beta square. Alright, that is again, i-represent natin to using the fundamental identity. That is 1 plus the tangent of beta square. Okay? So, we have just represented secant squared as this one and then minus 2 tan of b or 2 tan of beta. Okay? So, that's it. So, we have just manipulated it using the fundamental identities. Okay? Now, since this is somewhat a complex fraction, what we're going to do is to at least simplify this one by multiplying the numerator with the reciprocal of the denominator, making this one equivalent to, so kapag minultiply natin ito, mawawala na ito, magiging tan of b. So si tan of b, i-multiply natin dito. So that is what? Tan of b multiplied by 1 over tan of b. That is actually equivalent to 1. Okay? And then tan of b multiplied by negative 1, that is actually the negative tan of b or tan of beta. Okay? So, if we simplify this one, ito po yung kalalabasan niya. Alright? Using the complex fraction, using the knowledge of complex fraction, or the knowledge of simplifying complex fraction. And then, we copy this one. Okay? Because we cannot simplify it anymore. Okay? So, ito po yung magiging resulting equation. Alright. And then, kung mapapansin natin, if we rearrange this one, this is actually a trinomial wherein it can be represented as what? It can be represented as the difference of two squares. So, we can say, or i-rearrange muna natin siya. I-rearrange muna natin siya as 1 minus the tangent of beta. The tangent of beta multiplied by, i-rearrange muna natin, that is 1. And then minus 2 tan of beta plus the tangent squared beta. Tangent squared beta. Okay? And again, this trinomial can be expressed as the difference of two squares, making that equal to 1 minus the tangent of beta multiplied by, so how are we going to represent this one? Alright, this is actually 1 minus the tangent of beta square, or the square of 1 minus the tangent of beta. Okay? So, hindi po simple ang mag-prove ng identity. You have to deal with a lot of algebraic manipulations if possible. Okay? And then, if we're going to simplify this one, this is another factor. By the way, let us put parenthesis para hindi tayo malito. If we are going to simplify this one, this is actually, this says that we have 1 minus tangent of beta. So, kung isi-simplify natin yan, this is actually equivalent to this one. Alright? Equals this one. Alright? So, kapag sinimplify natin ito po ang lalabas. So, indeed, we have just proved that this is an identity. Okay po? So, that is another example. Okay? Again, in dealing with proving identities, first things first is for you to determine whether or what side of the equation or the identity is more complicated, at doon kayo magi-start, and then you do, or using the knowledge of fundamental identities, you try to manipulate it. Okay? And then do some algebraic processes. Okay? But then, there are problems wherein almost pareho siyang complicated, just like this one. We have 1 plus cotangent of y over the cosecant of y equals 1 plus the tangent of y over secant of y. Okay? Medyo kung titignan natin siya, halos parehas lang siya. Alright? So, hindi na po dito pwede yung suggestion na pipili tayo ng side na mas complicated. Alright? You can actually manipulate both sides. Okay? But then, one at a time. Alright? So, one at a time lang po natin siya i-manipulate. Let's say, for example, let's start with the right side. I-manipulate natin sa right side, which is 1 plus cotangent of y over cosecant of y. And using our knowledge of what do you call that? The knowledge of the fundamental identities, let us try to manipulate it using the knowledge of that. Okay? And that becomes, if we're going to simplify this one, or if we're going to represent this using the fundamental identities, that is 1 plus, so si cotangent of y, we can represent that as, using the ratio identity, that is the cosine of y over the sine of y. Okay? And then si cosecant of y naman, we can actually what? We can actually represent it using the reciprocal property, that is 1 over the sine of y. Okay? And then what we are going to do with this one is for us to, again, since dito muna tayo sa numerator, since it deals with a whole number and then a fraction part, i-simplify muna natin siya as a single fraction by multiplying both sides by, or multiplying this expression by the sine of y para maging single fraction siya, and that will yields to what? That will yields to, okay, again, lagay lang natin, we have to multiply it with sine of y para guided tayo, para maging single fraction siya. Ano? That is the sine of y. Alright, that is the sine of y plus the cosine of y over the sine of y. Okay? So, ito po, kapag sinimplify po natin ito, or kapag ginawa po natin siyang single fraction, this will be the resulting expression. And then, we have down there, 1 over the sine of y. Okay? This is again another complex fraction wherein they have the same denominator. Alright? They have the same denominator. Meaning to say, pwede na po natin siyang i-direct. Alright? Canceling sine of y. So, this expression will yields to the sine of y cosine of y. Or the sine of y plus the cosine of y. Sorry. Alright? So, if we simplify pala, the left-hand side of the equation, ito po yung lalabas. Okay? So, isang part pa lang po yan. That is just the left hand. How about if we manipulate this part? Okay? Let us manipulate the right hand. Alright? By the knowledge of fundamental identities, let us represent that. That is 1 plus, if we're going to use the ratio identity, tangent of y can be represented as the sine of y over the cosine of y, and then the secant would be what? Would be represented as, or can be represented as 1 over the cosine of y. Alright? And then, just like what we did a while ago, we multiplied this. Alright? We multiplied the numerator since it deals with a whole number in a fraction. For us to make it as a single fraction, we multiply it with the LCD, which is the cosine of y. And if we're going to simplify that, that is actually equivalent to cosine of y times 1. That is the cosine of y. Plus, just copy this one, the sine of y, over the LCD, which is the cosine of y. Okay? And then, the denominator, let us just copy that because there are no manipulations to be made. So, that's gonna be the 1 over cosine of y. And since this is a complex fraction wherein the denominator of the numerator is same with that of the denominator in the denominator, so we can just directly cancel the cosine of y, making this expression equivalent to cosine of y plus the sine of y. Okay? And this indeed is equivalent to our left-hand part or the left-hand side. Meaning to say, 1 plus cotangent of y over the cosecant of y equals 1 plus tangent of y over secant of y is indeed a trigonometric identity. Alright? So that is for our example number 3. Alright, so in this example, we have illustrated that we can actually manipulate both sides of the equation, for us, or by making both sides simpler. Okay, both expressions on the both sides are simpler. Alright. So let us now proceed with our fourth and last example. It says here that we have sine of x over 1 plus cosine of x equals 1 minus cosine of x over the sine of x. It is somewhat tricky because it was presented in a more simpler manner. Bakit? Naka-sine and cosine form na po siya. So medyo mahirap if medyo mahirap siya kasi we cannot even apply the fundamental identities here. Alright? But then kung mapapansin natin, si 1 plus cosine of x at saka si 1 minus cosine of x they are conjugates. Okay? And kung gagalawin naman natin si right hand, or eto si right hand, medyo simple naman yung denominator niya compared dito kay left hand. So what we're going to do is to multiply the left hand with the conjugate of its denominator. So making that equivalent to what? So, ang gagalawin naman po natin dito is the left hand. Multiplying the left hand by the conjugate, which is 1 minus the cosine of x. Alright, so kung magmumultiply tayo kay numerator, dapat magmumultiply din tayo kay denominator. And that is 1 minus the cosine of x. In such a way that in this concept, 1 minus cosine of x over 1 minus cosine of x is indeed equivalent to 1. So wala po tayong na-violate na kahit anong algebraic rule. Alright? And then what we're going to do is just to simplify this expression. Sine x times 1, that is sine x minus 1, that is sine x. And then sine x times negative cosine of x, that is negative sine of x cosine of x. Okay? Over what? Over what is 1? This is somewhat multiplication of two binomials. Okay, so I just put parenthesis para wala tayong ma-violate na rule. Alright, so if we're going to, this is we multiply a sum and then a difference. So meaning to say, ang magiging resulting value would be the difference of two squares. So we have 1 minus the cosine squared of x. Cosine squared of x. Okay? Equals the right hand side. Okay? And then what we're going to do, so dito sa part na to, medyo may nakikita na tayong idea. So dito is that what? Pwede naman natin siyang gawing, or dito sa denominator ni left, this is actually what? This can actually be, or this idea is actually the Pythagorean identity, which is equivalent to the sine squared x. Okay? So we simplify the denominator as the sine of x. Okay? That is the sine of x squared. Okay, equals the right hand side. Okay? So medyo may nakikita na tayong light kasi both denominators now of the left hand side and the right hand side are equal or are almost equal. Okay? And then so may nakikita na rin tayo dito that in the denominator there is a common factor which is sine, and dun sa denominator may sine din siya. So pwede nating ibalik dito sa part na ito para at least ma-factor out natin siya, making this as the sine of x multiplied by, kapag inalis natin sine of x, 1 yung matitira, minus kapag dito naman is cosine of x over the denominator which is sine squared x equals the right hand side, which is 1 minus cosine over sine x. Alright, and if we're going to simplify this one, kapag sinimplify po natin to, mawawala na po yung square and makakancel na po natin si sine x dun sa numerator part. And that makes it what? That makes it equivalent to 1 minus cosine of x over sine x equals 1 minus cosine of x over sine x. So indeed, this given is an identity. All right. So we have illustrated different scenarios on how are we going to prove identities. All right. The first two examples is that we chose a side or a more complicated side and we start with it and manipulating it algebraically. The third example illustrates by manipulating both sides of the identity or the equation. And on the last example, we make use of the idea of the conjugates. Okay? As long as wala po tayong vina-violate na algebraic rule or any rule of math, then you are on the right process. Okay? Again, some suggested tips are posted on the description, on the video description for you to be guided.